Good evening everyone. I'm Manisha and today we are going to discuss a very interesting chapter of grade 10th biology, heredity and evolution. Before we start this chapter, we must have studied about the mode of reproduction, reproduction in plants and animals as well. We know that we are not the identical copies of our parent. Like, do we carry some characteristics from both of our parent, but at the same time we are not just identical copies of them. Reason for such variations are for sure sexual reproduction. But people at that time, in the previous era, were not sure about the reason or the factors which cause these variations in offspring or in the progenies. Now, for that, Mendel kept on working consecutively in his Montessori and he came up with some really interesting rules and laws of heredity, which are known as law of inheritance. Now, before we start the law of inheritance, we need to know that for proving the law, Mendel actually chosen pea plant, or we can call it Pisum sativum as well. Now, the call is why he only chosen pea plant, why not any other plant? Reason for that, when he was consecutively studying the characteristic presented by a pea plant, he came up with that 7 traits which a single pea plant can show. Like the very first one is the height or the length of the stem of the pea plant. Then pattern of the seed. Then pattern of the seed, like the seeds were either round or wrinkled. Then pattern of the seed pod. And so on. Color of flowers, pattern of seed pod, and everything was so much well presented by a pea plant. Those make this pea plant a best choice to study the law of inheritance. With that, Mendel came up with some laws of inheritance. In this chapter, we are going to discuss 2 basic laws of inheritance. The very first law of inheritance. Before we start the law of inheritance, we should know on what basis, on what all crosses these laws were inculcated, were implanted. So the very first one is monohybrid inheritance. Monohybrid inheritance, and the second is dihybrid inheritance. In today's class, we are going to discuss about monohybrid inheritance. Before we switch to the concept, we should know what monohybrid inheritance is. Monohybrid basically stands for choosing one trait or one character to make a cross between the parent or either the parents. Like for a female and a male plant, when these one trait is chosen for the cross, that makes it monohybrid cross. For an example, the length of the stem, color of the flower, or pattern of the seed, like it's round or wrinkled, is the flower purple or white, or is the plant stem of the pea plant is tall or short. On basis of this single character, the single trait, when the cross were done in the single trait, it is called monohybrid cross. So let's study this monohybrid cross in detail. So in monohybrid cross, Mendel chosen the tallness of the stem. So for tallness, we represent it with capital T. Capital T stands for the tallness, and small t, this stands for the shortness of the stem. That means the factors which are making these plants either pure tall or pure short are having the alleles or the genes for capital, like tall tree or small plant only. Now, as we know, we'll receive gametes. This one is the F1 generation. So in F1 generation, when the cross was done, it was observed that from capital, the tall plant will receive only capital genes or the tallness gene. Then from this one, the short one, will receive both the genes which will carry the character of shortness only. When the crosses were done, it was found that in this generation, all the progenies You could clearly see it here that all the progenies were showing one trait, one gene which is capital. And as we know, capital T is always dominant. That means all the plant in the F1 generation, will be tall. So their phenotypal structure would be all tall plant, though they have the gene present for the shortness as well, but that is a recessive character. Only the tallness is present, that means all the plant will be appearing or represent the tallness only. This was the F1 generation where the character were not independently shown. Now for the F2 generation, the parental genotype would be, for the F2 generation, the parental genotype would be a hybrid combination of dominant and recessive characters. Again, we know we'll receive two gametes from each parent. So that stands for capital T and small t. So now during this cross, if we make a Punnett square or we make a cross, we can clearly see that we'll receive three plants which would have a capital T in them. That means they will show the tallness, or they'll represent the tallness of the plant. One is having complete small allele or small gene in it, so it will only demonstrate a short plant. So if we calculate the ratio in the F2 generation, we can clearly see that ratio of the phenotype, the physical appearance is 3:1, where 3 is the tall plant and 1 is a short plant. But at the same time, if we talk about their genotype, we can clearly say that 1 is the pure tall plant, 2 are the one which are dominant with their capital T allele, and the 1 is completely short plant. So the genotypic ratio comes as 1:2:1. With that, Mendel concluded one law of inheritance, which is expression of all the character independently. Some characters were completely suppressed in the F1 generation, but they do not go completely absent. They express themselves in the second generation, where we could see the free independence of all the alleles present in the parental generation. So with that, we'll start with the dihybrid cross in the next class. Take care. Good night.